Chief Community Officer here at Tattered Cover. This is part of our TC Presents series, where we examine issues that affect our community with experts, with great panelists, and we'll provide a reading list to you afterwards to engage more deeply on the topics we've discussed tonight. So it's my pleasure to introduce Steven from Envision You, and he will be the moderator for tonight's event. Thank you all for being here.
Great, thanks, Alan. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight for a collaboration between Tattered Cover and Envision You. I'm Steven Haden. My pronouns are he and him, and I'm the CEO of Envision You, a Denver-based nonprofit committed to improving behavioral health outcomes for members of the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and questioning community, also LGBTQ+ community. Our event takes place during Mental Health Awareness Month. Mental Health Awareness Month was established in 1949 to increase awareness of the importance of mental health and wellness in Americans' lives and to celebrate recovery from behavioral health concerns. Mental health, as we all know, is essential for a person's overall health. Specifically, our focus tonight is on LGBTQ+ mental health. The LGBTQ+ community represents a diverse range of identities and expressions of gender and sexual orientation. In addition to these identities, members of the community are diverse in terms of race, religion, ethnicity, nationality, and socioeconomic class. This intersectionality, the combined and overlapping aspects of a person's identity, brings diversity of thought, perspective, understanding, and experience. This complexity is important to our conversation tonight to understand as a unique and valuable aspect of the LGBTQ+ community that can result in a strong sense of pride and resiliency. While belonging to the LGBTQ+ community can be a source of strength, it also brings unique challenges. For those that identify as part of the community, it's important to recognize how your experience of sexual orientation and gender identity relates to your mental health. Joining us tonight, I have a pleasure of introducing Marvyn Allen, the Health Equity and Training Director from One Colorado, Syah Taylor from Syah Consulting, who is also a member of the Envision You Board of Directors. Pleased to welcome RP Whitmore-Bard, who is the Program Director of Queer Asterisk, Quana Madison, who is an artist, mindfulness teacher, an arts-based wellness instructor, who is also a member of the Envision You Board of Directors. So let's spend a few minutes to get to know our panelists. Quana.
So my name's Quana Madison. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm also the founder of Quana Madison Fine Art and Consulting. And as Steven mentioned, I am a mindfulness meditation teacher and an arts-based wellness facilitator. It is an absolute pleasure to be here, and I'm very passionate about promoting mental and emotional well-being.
Great, Quana. So good to see you, RP. How are you?
I'm really honored to be here, grateful to be here. So my name is RP Whitmore-Bard. I use they, them pronouns or all pronouns. I'm the program director at Queer Asterisk Therapeutic Services, as Steven mentioned. I'm trained as a psychotherapist, and at Queer Asterisk, we provide counseling and community programming and educational training from a queer and trans-centered perspective.
Great, thanks, RP. Hi, Syah.
Hi, it's me, Syah B. Pronouns are whatever you feeling in the moment, so you cannot be wrong ever. And yes, Syah does be consulting, period. And with that, I do training, educational and education development. I do group facilitation, healing and resiliency spaces. And I also offer empathy coaching. So you can learn more at my website right there, deepdivedei.com. for more information. Outside of that, I'm also a musician. I'm also I play piano, I sing, I play trombone, but my trombone is still in Arkansas, originally from Arkansas, BT dubs. I'm also involved in the local Denver ballroom community. And so I do Vogue, I walk the runway and all of that. So super excited to be here. And this is also important for me just because I didn't get a lot of support growing up from my gender sexuality. So I'm always here. I'm very passionate about kind of being that adult role model for a lot of young folks. So super excited to be here.
Great, Syah. You'll have to let us know the next event where you're going to be performing, for sure. Marv, how are you tonight?
Hi, I'm well and very excited to be here. My name is Marvyn Allen. My pronouns are they, them, theirs, and I'm the Health Equity and Training Director for One Colorado. I'm also a co-founder of a Colorado nonprofit called Transformative Freedom Fund. But at One Colorado, we are the state's leading advocacy organization for LGBTQ Coloradans and our families. And we work a lot at the policy level, as well as working for safe schools. And I have the privilege of working as the Health Equity and Training Director. So focusing a lot on LGBTQ health, both in and out of medical offices and healthcare facilities, and just really excited to be here to talk about mental health for our community.
Great, thanks, Marv. So what's going to follow tonight is a conversation to increase understanding about the experience LGBTQ folks have when accessing mental and behavioral health care services. What are some of the prevalent mental health outcomes in the community, and what you can do to find affirming care? We also hope that what you learned today is something you can take back into your community to support your friends, colleagues, and loved ones who are part of the community. So again, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Really grateful to be able to have this conversation. So Marv, if I could, I'm going to start with you. What rights do people in Colorado have if they feel they've been discriminated against in the healthcare, in a healthcare setting?
Yeah, that's a great question, Stephen, because what we find at One Colorado is that LGBTQ Coloradans still largely avoid going to see medical professionals, even in times of need, because they have experienced past discrimination and fear of future discrimination, or have had negative experiences with their providers. So it's important to know that Colorado is a great state for patient rights and for LGBTQ rights. We have the Colorado Anti-Discrimination Act that does protect sexuality, gender identity, and gender expression in the state. So if anyone feels like that they've been discriminated against, they do have a right to reach out to the Colorado Civil Rights Division and file a complaint. And healthcare falls under public accommodation. So there's different timelines for the state for folks to be able to file for that, or there's different timelines for the state versus federal for folks to be able to file for that. So within the state, if you feel like you've experienced discrimination in a public accommodation, specifically healthcare, whether it's physical or mental health care, you have 60 days, but at the federal level, you have 180 days. So that's just important for folks to know if they do want to go down that route. Also, if your health insurance plan is covered by is regulated by the Colorado Division of Insurance, there's a lot of rights there, as well as the Colorado Division of Insurance puts out some helpful guides around, and there's a siren going by. They put out some really really helpful guides around mental health parity and specific guides for LGBTQ folks, ensuring that they know their rights with the Colorado Division of Insurance regulated plans. I think it's also important for folks to know, because a lot of people don't know this, if you're denied for medical care, say a surgery or something else, and your insurance denies that, you do have a right to appeal that decision and continue to appeal that decision. And oftentimes, even though it's an emotional battle to go through and a lot for folks to go through, people often will have success coming out of the appeals process. So that's one thing I like to let folks know, because oftentimes folks will get denials and feel like that's the end of their journey for them, or the last option for them. And it's really not. Folks are welcome to reach out to One Colorado. And yes, thank you, Donovan just dropped in our organizational webpage. So you're welcome to reach out to us if you have questions going through this. We also work great with some other partners in the communities that walk folks through this process. And yeah, we'd love to be a support if you find yourself in that situation.
Thank you, Marv. And yeah, for those who are not familiar, One Colorado just does absolutely amazing work. And so really grateful for the leadership of your organization and the difference you're making in the lives of not just LGBTQ folks, but the people that love them and care so much about the community. So thank you, One Colorado. RP, I want to ask you, what are some barriers that LGBTQ folks have in accessing mental and behavioral health care?
Thanks, Stephen. One of the things that I so often hear from clients who maybe come to Queer Asterisk after seeking mental health care services elsewhere is that they may not have, even if they've had access to care before, they may not have shared as honestly and as fully as they needed to for their own mental health as a result of perhaps not seeing themselves reflected in their provider, or for other reasons, just not having that sense that what they have to share and really who they are will be safe in that space, certainly emotionally, and in some cases even physically, like from clients who maybe have spent time in residential treatment centers or other settings where they may have experienced bullying or other kind of real threats to actually coming out and being who they are when they're in that setting in order to get access to care. So honestly, often with my clients, we spend the first couple of months working through trauma that they may have gone through from past mental health care providers, unfortunately. And so that's where I think, access, of course, on the policy level is so, so important. More and more queer and trans folks becoming therapists and working in this space is so, so important. And I'm personally very dedicated to training students and helping make that possible for more and more people. And in addition to that, I think, for therapists out there who, or any, mental health care provider who is not within the community, really to take the time and invest the money to, receive education and training, in some cases maybe ongoing, in order to really know how to best serve these populations, because access is one thing, of course, and then after that comes really being able to, with competence, serve the clients who walk into your door or come into your office.
Great. Yeah, thanks so much, RP. Yeah, it's not just about access, but making sure that when we step into that treatment facility or our clinician's office, that we are welcomed and there's an affirming space for us to begin the healing process. So thanks for the great work that you and your team do. Syah, want to ask you, how have you remained resilient through navigating the world with your identities? What is something you've learned about your resiliency?
Yeah, ooh, child, resiliency. Let's talk about it, because I feel like that is something that whenever I'm going in to do, for example, a training, for example, with therapists or with whoever I'm going to do a training for on LGBTQ issues or marginalized populations in general, what people tend to be kind of hungry for, what they're expecting when I'm coming into the room, is for me to basically list off all the ways this community is doomed, right? What are all the supports we don't have, all of the things that we're facing, all of the barriers, as RP just mentioned, right? And what people don't take some time to realize is that it's because we're looking at such a deficit model, we've already characterized someone who's coming into our office as doomed, as as someone who needs our help, right? It kind of fuels this savioristic feeling that a lot of us are pulled towards in our society, and so we actually are not giving the best care. By looking at resiliency factors, we can actually find and create empowering environments for our clients, for young people who are coming to us with issues, or young people who are just trying to exist. Maybe there is nothing going on, but we still want to celebrate those things that make you unique, right? And so for me, talking about resiliency is very, very important and gets overlooked. But for me, what's what's so interesting, right, is this idea of identity saliency, right? The awareness that we have towards an identity, right? How often we're thinking about it, how stressed we are about it, how much we're focusing on it. And for me, growing up, the most salient identity for me was my gender and my sexuality, because I was actually in a diverse place. I'm from Little Rock, Arkansas. I went to the same school as Little Rock 9. It was a very, and for college, I went to University of Memphis. I was surrounded by people of a lot of different races, but my gender and sexuality identity was really not represented, right? And it was actually attacked in a lot of different ways. And I think a lot of young people who are in our community really face this weird, not weird, but this hard internal struggle of trying to fit in, trying to survive, trying to do what we need to do in order to make it as far as we can. And there's also these parts of us that we feel like we have to, or I'll speak from an I perspective. For me growing up, there were these parts of me that I felt like I had to push to the side and hide in certain ways, almost making myself invisible in order to make that happen. But they're still there, right? There's still these super important things to me. And even if it's certain clothes that I'm wearing, certain choreography that I'm learning from Lady Gaga or Beyonce, right? Regardless of what it is, for some, right, that's my self-expression. That's really how I see myself. And it's almost like you can't win, right? You're just stuck in this catch-22. And so for me, I really had to let go of the things that were not serving me. I had to let go of religion. I had to let go of certain community because, and you know, when you, I don't know, I'll speak for myself again. When I came out, you know, I lost some people, and that's just a real experience that you have. And at the same time, even though it feels like I was losing so much, I was actually creating space and openings for something better to come in. So now I'm in a place where I have chosen family. I'm in a place where I'm surrounded by queer and trans people of color, queer and trans people of various ethnicities and backgrounds and experiences and stories. And what I'm finding is that by diving into those relationships and, you know, really being true to what brings me joy, what brings me happiness, and, you know, creating that room for that, that's where my resiliency comes from. Voguing, for example, has actually been really a healing experience for me. When I'm voguing, sometimes I'm like, I feel like I'm in touch with my gay ancestors somewhere. I don't know who they are, but I feel them with me right now, and walking with that. And I think too, what comes from that community is you kind of have to force confidence in a way. You kind of have to be that person who is like, you know what, I don't care what the world says, you know, I'm in this house, or I am a part of this community, I am a drag queen, I am this, that, and the third, and really owning that. And there's so much power that comes with that. And I would say finding those support systems that work for you, finding those spaces where you can actually just exist and breathe, that you don't have to be anything extra but yourself, were some of the most healing experiences for me.
Great, thanks so much, Syah. And yeah, you mentioned youth, and it certainly has been a really tough year for all of us. But I'm really mindful of the experiences young people have, the challenges they've faced over the past year. And I want to turn to Quána. What are some of the mental health challenges facing young queer folks in Colorado and really around the country?
That's a really excellent question, Stephen. We know from decades of research that there has been increasing health disparities experienced by our LGBTQ plus and non-conforming youth. We know that a lot of these challenges are associated with growing up really in a social context that stigmatizes and discriminates against sexuality and gender identity. And that if you don't have a supportive space to be in, or understanding space, that it has tremendously negative impacts on health and health behaviors. Specifically for Colorado, LGBTQ plus youth here are experiencing much higher rates of bullying. Recent research suggests that 2 in 5 LGB youth will experience bullying, which is about 1.9 times more likely than their heterosexual peers. And for our transgender youth, 3 in 5 are more likely to experience bullying, making them more than 2.7 times more likely than their cisgender peers. And so we know that bullying is one of the factors that puts really immense strain on queer teens' mental health, in addition to fear of rejection or other anti-LGBTQ messages that may be heard in the community spaces that our youth are in or in media, and how that chronic stress that's associated with that, with having a stigmatized and often hidden identity, really can exacerbate our various mental health problems. And so when thinking about this, I personally get very concerned because I know as a former educator over the last 20 years of the impacts of that mental health issue compounding and how it leads to higher rates of suicide or attempted suicide or contemplating that. And so as a former educator, I think about, what can we do in the spaces that we're in to make sure that we as, let it be educators or as caregivers or community members or healthcare providers supporting youth, doing to, take very specific training to be affirming, similar to what Syah was saying about how do we focus on resiliency? How do we focus on not just a deficit mindset, but a strengths-based mindset, and reflecting on what we do in the spaces that we're in to support youth and inviting their own voices to be involved with reflecting on ways in which we can better support them. In the state of Colorado, there's some recent research I was reading about that talked about LGBTQ plus youth feeling that they do not have access to adults to support them when they are experiencing various challenges, either in regards to their own identity or just with mental health challenges that may or may not be linked directly to their identity. And so the awareness of this is so key, because if we're not aware, we can't do anything to mitigate and reduce bullying or to mitigate the other structural barriers that our queer youth are facing in not only Colorado, but across the nation.
Yeah, thanks, Quána, for that. And, just another really distressing statistic that recently came out, the Trevor Project, which really supports young queer folks from around the US, came out with a research report that said nearly half of young queer youth in this country had strong thoughts of suicide during the past year. So it's a cause of concern for all of us. And I know each of us in the work that we are doing are working to make a difference, to give young people hope and support and resources they need so they can move from that place of just feeling like they're surviving to thriving. And that's something we should all want, regardless of what community you identify with. Part of the conversation tonight is, of course, educating folks so we can all do a better job. But just, my call to action, one of the things that I hope with these types of conversations is we all leave thinking, how do I support my community so everyone thrives? RP, I know you provide direct clinical services. And so I'm curious, what are some prevalent mental health outcomes in the LGBTQ plus community?
As a result of seeking services, positive mental health outcomes?
Yeah, I think just in part of, what are some of the overarching challenges that folks face, and what are opportunities when they find an affirming provider?
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. So I think that first and foremost, I want to say, and I think probably everybody here either already knows this or is feeling it tonight just from this amazing panel, being queer and trans or gender nonconforming, it's a gift. That's really how I see it. That's how I feel it. And I think that's how we have to approach mental health care with queer and trans and gender nonconforming folks. I think we talk a lot about the challenges, and I know we're here to talk about the challenges, and we need to be talking about the challenges. And I also just want to say that, advocating on behalf of my clients and my community and myself and just this work, I wanted to name that. And that being said, I think, just like everybody, folks in our community come seeking services for depression, anxiety, feeling like things may have gotten so bad that they don't want to live anymore, which, by the way, most often is a result of the environment that somebody is in, what they're experiencing, how other people are treating them. It is not an individual problem. And so that's something I think that we see a lot, unfortunately, in our community, and the statistics have been named, which are so disturbing and heartbreaking. And that, to me, that's not something that should fall on the shoulders of us and of our community. It's really up to the whole society and the rest of society who are creating these conditions for folks in our community, such that so many of us want to end our lives. I mean, it's just, I could cry thinking about it. It's really just unbelievable. And I'm grateful that the tide is turning in many ways in our society. So I will say, yes, a lot of suicidal ideation. Addiction is something we could certainly talk about. I know, Steven, you could talk a lot about this. Higher, rates of substance use and substance misuse that we see among LGBTQ youth and folks of all ages. Eating disorders as well, which is something that I specialize in. And again, all of these forms of distress and ways that symptoms can manifest in people, which can look different from one person to another. And of course, each person's experience of mental health and mental health challenges is unique. And yet, I think if we can look for some sort of a pattern here, the stress and distress of being a member of a marginalized group, I think that's really what we're talking about here. There's not something innately difficult, I would say, about being a person who is LGBTQ. I think that, really what's difficult is being isolated, not having access to a sense of belonging, not having access to a sense of being wanted and loved at that very existential level. There's, I see a lot of struggles with shame and self-hatred and all of these really very deep-seated mental health issues, which again, I just think we cannot sort of treat the issue. We have to look at the larger picture of where is this coming from, because this is a human being who wants to thrive and wants to live their best life and wants to be able to be who they are. And a lot of the internal conflict and internal tension that results in these mental health symptoms, again, is just, I see so often a result of not having that kind of support and love on the level of family or community or school or work, or those larger circles of like the political sphere, right? Religion, et cetera, et cetera. The circles keep widening from there. So that being said, I think that when we look at mental health care treatment and behavioral health treatment, we have to be looking at those systems and understanding where are these issues coming from. How can we compassionately hold this person and guide them through their painful experiences, and also not, experience them or treat them as one unique person who has these problems, and let's just look at your unique past. And something that I'm really passionate about, and for Asterisk that we're always talking about and looking at, is collective trauma, right? So, yes, you have gone through these individual traumas or these situations or circumstances that have impacted your mental health and made life difficult for you. Of course, we want to unpack that and hold space for that and help you and give you skills to be able to support yourself and to empower you to improve your mental health. And like, let's look beyond that and really incorporate a wider view with mental health care. And that's why our community programs are so important, and why we do offer groups, and why we want to create opportunities for those reparative experiences of belonging, of having a family. I mean, I love that Syah is bringing in ballroom culture of like having a house. I mean, just this sense of like, yes, there are other people out here in my community with me who see me, who affirm who I am, who want to celebrate life with me. I think that these are such basic human needs and such basic experiences. We don't need to like be in mental health treatment to have those kinds of experiences. And in some cases, it's better to receive it in a different environment than like a therapy office. But I'm passionate about like blending the two for sure.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, RP. I know in my own personal experience, so I am a person in recovery. I'm also a suicide survivor. And, I want to acknowledge that I am a person of privilege. I'm white, I'm cisgender. I had access to insurance. And I recognize that's not something that's available to many folks, but even with that privilege, accessing care that was supportive of my queer identity and respected my lived experience. My first treatment facility, said that if I wasn't gay, I wouldn't be using substances, right? That it was the shame that I experienced as being a gay man that resulted in, my substance use disorder. And, how incredibly traumatizing that is to be blamed because of who I am for a really serious mental health issue. And so it did take many years for me to be able to come to terms with that and get the supportive help that I was able to get. And each of us at some point have talked about community, and it was really hard for me because so much of our community, as we know, centers around substance use. And for most people, that's not a problem. But when you're in recovery and you're trying to build a new community, it was really tough for me for a while. And so one of the things that I want to share with the folks that are watching tonight, that if you are struggling, that there is help and hope available for you, and that it's going to seem as if you're alone and that there isn't an opportunity to build a new community. And I'm here to tell you there is. And I'm so grateful that I'm alive today and that I've been clean and sober for almost 16 years. And I've been able to do that because of a lot of wonderful, caring people. So I'm really grateful for the opportunities that I've been given. So Marv, thinking about those barriers to access, what are some of those for LGBTQ folks in accessing mental health care?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I just want to, I know the panelists had some chats going, just say, so grateful you're here with us and that we're here with you. And thank you for sharing that. That's really powerful, I think, for a lot of folks out there who are going through it right now or have gone through it to hear those stories and know that, it's tough for a lot of us, but there is also a lot of hope. We see a lot of barriers for LGBTQ folks accessing all sorts of care, but particularly around mental health care. I think for everybody, there's still this unfortunate stigma around needing or accessing mental health care. And that, especially when we think about intersectionality among LGBTQ folks, even within other communities within our community, they might have even more hesitancy or lack even further providers that look like them, represent them, have had similar lived experiences as them. So what we find for LGBTQ Coloradans in our data is that one of the biggest barriers to accessing care for all Coloradans, but it's even higher for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and queer Coloradans, is the cost barrier to paying out of pocket. That barrier becomes even higher for trans and non-binary Coloradans. And this really goes back to those social determinants of health that LGBTQ folks don't always have equal access to. And so when I say that, I'm talking about these other parts of our lives and our health that don't have anything to do with what happens when we go to see our provider or we go to our healthcare facility. But those parts of our lives, how often do we worry about finding a nutritious meal? Do we have access to good food? Do we have access to drinking water? Do we have access, to housing that is safe and supportive? And these add extra stress onto our lives, anyone's lives. But for LGBTQ Coloradans, because of workplace discrimination and societal discrimination, they're often being, working jobs where they don't make as much, more likely to be unemployed. And especially for trans Coloradans, we see trans Coloradans are more likely to have higher education, some form of higher education, but way more likely to live below the poverty line. And so just understanding that our everyday impacts our mental health and I think it was so amazing that I think a couple of you all just kind of just kept adding to this idea, because we were talking about negative impacts around mental health. And I don't think, we can say it enough that those higher rates of suicide and suicide ideation and negative impacts to our mental health aren't because of our sexual orientation or gender identity. They are because of the experiences that we face, the lack of acceptance. And one thing I always like to say is, like, if you're, if there's a parent out there listening that isn't fully accepting of your child because you are worried about what their life will be like, you being affirming and accepting and getting them into affirming and accepting spaces, that can save their life. It can save them from, going down the path of drug addiction. It can save them from being 3 times more likely than the general population in Colorado to experience anxiety or depression. So those negative outcomes are when folks are rejected, when they're not given those safe spaces. So I always want to remind parents of that, because I hear too often that parents, their hesitancy and their lack of affirmation for their children comes out of fear. And there's really nothing to fear if you're affirming them. And as RP said, this is an honor, to be here. So, and queer and trans, and to have this experience. So I think just taking a lot of the shame out of folks' identities, out of accessing mental health care, is a big part of it. Also, I referenced this a little bit, but LGBTQ Coloradans struggle to find competent healthcare providers. And again, if you have intersecting marginalized identities, it might be even harder if you're looking for example, an LGBTQ competent provider who speaks Spanish as well. Like, these things, the more detailed you go for those needs, then it gets even harder to find. And when we're looking in rural areas, I hear, last year, every year, One Colorado takes a tour around the state. Last year, it moved to virtual, of course. And we were going around virtually to these different communities, and people were saying, like, there is a healthcare provider, but there's one for like 20 counties, like literally one LGBTQ competent, and they are booked. So it can be really difficult for us to find those providers. And then even from my experience as a trans person, mental health care is wrapped up in my ability to even exist authentically. And for trans folks, especially if you're going through insurance and having insurance pay for gender affirming care, we are required to get a diagnosis of gender dysphoria to even have access to that. So for us, there's also these feelings of gatekeeping and worrying about what we might say, even as we're speaking to someone who should be like the most trusted person. They have so much power in our next steps on our journey. I know when I went to get my letter for top surgery, I was very guarded. I was not completely out about my non-binary identity. I didn't know how much gatekeeping there would be. I know we see less and less and less of that over the years. But when your life is on the line, you say what you got to say. And so I think there's a lot of trauma in the medical system as well as the mental health system for LGBTQ folks. We've been told that our identities are diseases for a long, long time, that there's something to recover from. Just in Colorado, it was 2019 before we banned conversion therapy on minors. And conversion therapy is any attempt to change someone's sexual orientation or gender identity. And so much of that is done through shame. And even in Closing the Gap, we ask people, have you experienced conversion therapy? And we hope that number goes down further and further down as, it's banned on minors. And hopefully we can expand that, and ban it across the board someday.
Yeah, thanks, Marv. Just thinking about all the alienation that happens throughout the day and what that does to somebody's existence, and just that sense that I belong. If you're being told throughout your lived experience that you're other, that you're less than, that you don't deserve, just imagine the impact it has. It's brutal, it's unrelenting, and it does lead folks to very dark places. And again, that's the opportunity for all of us, parents, caregivers, policymakers, people in places of privilege and power to come together to make a difference for this community. So people again start moving from a place of surviving to thriving. I know we've talked a little bit about the youth experience, and Syah, I'm curious for you, if you could have a conversation with your younger self, what would you tell them?
Ooh, child. You about to cry and stuff. Oh my God. Yes. I want to shape this too, because of just the lens in this experience. And Marv just mentioned intersectionality, but to go even further, I think where we don't talk a lot about the disparities in our community is that intersectionality piece, right? So if you are of color in the LGBTQ community, especially in Denver, Colorado, where the population of Black folks is 2%, did not know that before I moved here. But the Black population is 2%. I went to University of Denver where the population was 1%. And that's, so you're actually facing racism within the queer community that you're not prepared for. If you live with a disability, then accessibility is a whole thing. Classism decides which issues get brought to the forefront and advocated for. So like we don't see, I'll speak from I have not seen youth homelessness and job discrimination at the forefront in this with the same energy that we had for something like queer marriage, right? Or it's really same-sex marriage, to be clear. And so for me, when I think back to my younger self and what I needed to hear, every time I get this question, I always like, wow, there's just so many different things. But I really think that the number one thing is, and something that anyone can say to an LGBTQ young person is that you are enough, right? That you can be celebrate with them. I would want to celebrate myself, celebrate the little things like the swish in my walk, the things that I would not get celebrated for normally. I would go back and really highlight those things, celebrate those things, and even more so encourage those things. Let's go get you a pair of shoes. Let's go get you this dress. Let's go get you this thing that's going to make you feel complete and celebrate you. And even if the outside world is not going to protect you and make you feel safe, here you can be. And just having that space to explore, I think would have been like the most important things for me. Yeah, and also letting myself know that in tandem with what Marv just said, right, that the world is the people with the problem, not you, right? That once you get up and old enough to like make it on your own, you are going to thrive. You're going to find your people, and everything is going to work out in ways that you cannot even imagine in your brain yet. That's what I would say.
Thanks, Syah. So, we're talking about barriers to accessing affirming care. We're talking about challenges the community experiences. And Quána, I have a question for you. What are some proactive things that we can do to support our health and wellness? If you're a person working in hospitals, behavioral healthcare settings, or social service settings, what are some of those things that those professionals can do?
There's a lot of different things that you can do. So I'll just share a few different ideas, and I encourage everyone to add on if you have other suggestions. So first, I encourage people working in these various health and wellness spaces to just seek out high quality LGBTQ+ affirming behavioral health trainings. For example, I know that Envision U offers a behavioral health training program, and it's based on relevant research and literature and like suggested best practices that can support queer individuals with behavioral health concerns. And there's a lot of other spaces that can provide these type of training. So please, seek that out. That can make such a difference. Next, I suggest just being a lifelong learner with regards to expanding your own critical knowledge and best practices. This is not a checklist where you just do a couple things and you're one and done. I feel like this is a value and an approach that you have to take as a practitioner for the rest of your lifetime, really, genuinely. So, educate yourself about the spectrums of sexuality and gender. Deepen your understanding about the concept of intersectionality and how it impacts the various people that you are seeking to serve. I identify personally as a Black, queer, disabled woman, and I know it made a tremendous difference when a healthcare provider and mental health care providers really understood that and could talk to me about that and understand the barriers I was facing, but also have a more of a positive strengths-based approach with celebrating who I was instead of just looking at me in a deficit lens. Other things that you can do is just be more aware about the various health disparities that are impacting the specific communities you're serving, and then recognize some of the barriers that may be impacting access to treatment, and reflect on ways within your own organizational spaces on how can you mitigate that. And then lastly, I would suggest, in addition to using inclusive and affirming language, be a trauma-informed practitioner. Really take time to educate yourself. And again, this is a lifelong type of practice of understanding the nature of trauma, understanding the different kinds of strategies that can be used to help people who are, struggling with those complex traumas. And reflect on your own individual biases and your own systemic biases that are happening in the spaces that you work within. I know that was a lot, and that can seem overwhelming, but if we're going to address this issue of improving mental and emotional wellness for our communities, and not just for the queer community, but for all communities, it's absolutely essential to be looking at structural issues and individual issues, and taking an approach that requires us to really be lifelong learners and practitioners trying to work together to uplift this.
Thanks, Quána, for that. So in addition to my role at Envision U, I'm also a clinician. And I know that I've had many colleagues say, well, I'm an ally to the community. I've got the pride flag in my window. I care about the community. And my response to that is, well, good, that's a great start. Now let's begin the really hard work that it takes to be not a competent. That's a word that I really dislike. We talk about sort of, culturally competent training. This is not about competency. This is about delivering affirming care that is going to impact a person's life. And it is an obligation that each person who's providing direct health or behavioral health care services should have. And, I've also heard folks say, well, I don't serve anyone from the queer community. Well, I'm here to tell you that's not true. Maybe the reason you don't know that is because they don't feel comfortable telling you that. So what I know is about 10% of the population identifies along the queer spectrum. And a recent survey that just came out just a few weeks ago, that age 12 to 24, almost 16% of young people identify on the queer spectrum. So I can tell you, you have some clients who identify as part of the queer community. So do what's right by the community. Commit to engaging in a rigorous training program. It's the right thing to do. And, I can, again, speak from my own personal experience of having sat in treatment rooms, in clinicians' offices, and the impact of not receiving that affirming care had on my life. And I know each of the panelists tonight have spoken about some of those challenges.
Stephen, could I add something briefly?
Of course.
I just want to say, and this might be a little bit bold, but just to encourage people to do the vulnerable work of looking at and experiencing your own sexuality, your own gender. I think that in some ways, queer identities and expressions can be this invitation for not only our community, but for everybody to kind of experience more freedom of being. And what it takes to get there sometimes is, some deep personal work, but it doesn't have to be so heavy, and it doesn't have to feel like a mandate or a rule, which I think sometimes can be, I've seen in the trainings that we do, it can be intimidating to people because they want to get it right and they're using their brains like, I have to get it right, I have to not mess up. And honestly, I think that, you know, sometimes it's more helpful to come from a place of how can I heal my own oppressive or harmful experiences of gender-based violence, or you know, the messages that maybe I was given about my sexuality when I was a kid, and you know, wanting to maybe go outside the bounds of what was available to me, etc. So I think again, it's, you know, maybe a bold thing to say in a professional setting, but I would encourage people who are practitioners or parents or anybody who's wanting to be an ally or be more than an ally. Sometimes you don't have to look very far beyond your own experiences in order to do that. And in fact, like looking within yourself and getting the support for that can be such a beautiful way to better understand the people around you who you're wanting to be a more competent or you know, a more aware provider for.
Thank you, RP. Yeah, that was a lovely perspective and an important one. So thanks for sharing that. I have some questions that I just want to ask our panelists, and please jump in. So there's been a lot of news lately about hateful policies that are being passed in states around the country. And I wondered, you know, what impact do you believe these hateful policies have, whether it's, you know, restroom bills or sports bans on trans and non-binary youth? What is the impact that has on a person's mental health?
I think that as I've been following those stories, it can have such negative impacts with making you feel invisibilized, not feeling like you have a sense of belonging, and you know, it can lead to not feeling celebrated and feeling somewhat hopeless, and again, not getting to engage in society in the same ways that we deserve to have the rights to be able to engage. So those are some of the things that come to mind immediately for me when thinking about that.
Yeah, for me, I think of, right, when we thinking about social justice and all these things, I try to frame to people this idea of there's culture and then there's policy, right? There's these two things that are interacting with each other all of the time. And sometimes policy impacts culture, culture impacts policy. And in this case, in a lot of places with these, some of these acts and policies that are coming into play, there's obviously a huge amount of a culture of a certain state or a certain city, whatever the case may be, that is, you know, it is very into, I can't think of the correct word right now, the word that I want to say, but they're very on board with very transphobic, homophobic ideology, right? And so by passing policy that is innately homophobic or transphobic, as a society, you are making a stand. You are making a statement that certain people are not welcome, that certain people should feel unsafe. And it comes down to, and I think what people do not think about, right, is this just, oh, well, it's just a policy. Well, that policy is going to, again, impact the culture. So it's impacting the way that we see trans individuals. For example, just on the restroom bill, if you're saying that you can dictate who can go into which restroom and you have the right to search someone's body, you have the right to invest in to investigate someone's authenticity, and then purposefully discriminate based on that, then you are setting a society where you are making sure that person knows that they are not going to be welcome, that they should be nervous, right, about where they're going. And so something that is as simple as, ooh, I need to use the restroom, turns into a life or death situation. Because if I am not passing as a trans person, then I'm in danger of using the restroom that is affirming to me. But if I'm also living in my truth and I'm now forced to use a restroom of the gender I was assigned at birth, then I'm also still at risk. There's no real middle ground. There's no actual safety. You're only considering one side of the coin, which is a population that, I will just go ahead and say it, is not educated on the topic to really make that decision for certain types of people. And at the end of the day, what are we talking about? A restroom. I will just say that as well, right? So I think that's another important thing to really be thinking about in terms of policy, is what message do we want to send to our community and how is that message impacting mental health? How is that message impacting, need for safety and just to be willing to, or being able to walk around in your community and feel safe, is something that we don't really think about in those policy decisions.
Yeah, I just yes to everything that's been said, and I just want to add, like, these are human rights issues that we're talking about, and very basic, and I just want to bring into this conversation, like, even for the folks who are not living in a state or in an area where maybe they're being directly impacted, still the news cycle, right? Like, still hearing about these bills, knowing that this is going on, just the terror of that, and the impact that that can have on somebody's mental health, the sense of like the walls are closing in. Again, it's not the same thing as being in the physical environment where your rights to access the restroom are being restricted. But if we're talking about mental health outcomes, I think that I've spoken with people who maybe are not directly impacted and are still directly impacted, because it's so scary, because just the anticipation of things getting worse can have such a devastating effect.
Yeah, I agree. I think even when these bills do not pass and become law, they still have a profound effect on LGBTQ people and youth in particular. I think about, when you're watching the news in a family setting, for example, or with other people, it's not just what's on the TV, but there's commentary. When things are on the news, we talk about it in our lives. We hear about it when we're walking through the grocery store. Like, we pick up on these conversations, and young people are really looking, I think when they hear about this stuff on the news, then they're looking to their protective adults to say, do you agree with this? And what I think is really important is that you might not know that the young person that you're a parent of, a caregiver for, a teacher of, whatever that your relationship may be, you might not know yet what their sexual orientation or gender identity is or will be one day. And you could be instilling in them some intense shame and fear about coming out. And that is, such a deep root for, mental illness and substance use. And so I think as these conversations are happening on the news and in like the public view, I think we also need to be having these conversations, regardless of the sexual orientation or gender identity of the youth and young people that we're around, but saying this is not okay. Because as other folks on this call have said, it's not about the bathrooms and it's not about the sport. It's about controlling people's lives and telling people you don't belong here. You should not be here. And just all that hatred coming at a person, it's hard. Like, I'm 40 years old and it's been hard on me hearing this stuff, and luckily in Colorado, we didn't face a lot of it this year in legislative session, but last year we defeated 7 anti-LGBTQ bills in one day, and that was because of people coming up to talk, medical providers, parents, teachers, members of the community. We have to keep showing up time and time again to not only fight for the rights that we've won, but to keep the rights, because there are people still coming at us trying to take them away. And so it's not about the bathroom and it's not about the sport. It's about people trying to have control over other people's lives and saying your identity is not valid, so you can't be here. And that hurts.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that perspective. And when you listen to that, 7 pieces of legislation that have been sponsored by elected officials, representatives of communities across Colorado that are anti-LGBTQ in the course of a few days, just imagine the impact that has on folks who are just trying to get by, and the amount of work that it takes from individuals to stand up and speak, and the people that care for them, and the good work that One Colorado does and other organizations in Colorado. It does require a lot of energy. And, I often think all of that hate, all of that energy that's directed at people, and then all of the energy that it takes to respond to that. And I know this sounds utopian, but just imagine if all of that energy was fostered towards something good and for the betterment of our community. Just imagine the different world we'd be living in. And that's something that we all can. I can do a better job of, is just finding moments throughout the day to be kinder and extend compassion to folks that are struggling. And that's something I'm committed to. I know that's something that all of our panelists are committed to. And I urge everyone that's joining us this evening to make that commitment as well. You know, something that's come up in some of our conversations, but I think it's worth touching on again. You know, if you could speak directly to a parent or a caregiver of a young person struggling with their sexual orientation or gender, what would be most helpful? And again, I know we've touched on a little bit about this, but this question is so important because it's about saving lives. So I want to open that up to all of our panelists.
And Steven, my apologies. Can you please repeat the question one more time? I'm having some sound issues back here where I am.
Of course, yeah. So if you could speak directly to a parent or caregiver of a young person struggling with their sexual orientation or gender, what would be most helpful?
One of the first things that comes to my mind is, you know, encouraging parents and caregivers to hold space with your child to be able to value talking about mental health, just in general, of doing, you know, check-ins and sharing about your own mental health journeys or battles and landscape, and holding space for them to know that it's okay to talk about that. So many youth and adults will not seek service, intervention, or support because we feel such shame and it's not talked about, and there's such a stigma. And so I think that one way to give support is just talking about that and the value of it, and not just from a space of a medical model of, you have this problem, we just need to fix this problem. I would say expand your notion, talk about mental health to be more of, hey, this is your mental health landscape is something that you're going to need to take care of for the rest of your life. We all do. Let's think about ways that we can work together to give you the supports for that, where your mental health is not something we're just trying to fix. Your mental health is something we're trying to nourish and grow new things in. I know for myself, I use the analogy inner peace garden for my mental and emotional well-being and health, to flip the framing to make it something that is, again, strengths-based, positive, and something that you look at as, hey, let's think about the coping tools, the different things that we do just to help nourish it over your lifetime. And hopefully being open to share about your own experiences. That makes such a difference.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. Oh my gosh. Inner peace garden. Is that what you said? I'm going to take that with me. Thank you.
Yes, inner peace garden. Think about what seeds you want to sow into your garden. And hey, depending on your life circumstances, there might be certain climate patterns happening, certain weathers, seasons happening in your life, and you might have to change what you do to address things in your garden. But if you look at it that way, it's something that, you know, you get into gardening. For any of you out there listening who love gardening, you start to get into it and can discover that there's such joy and love and just happiness that can happen when you approach your mental health and your holistic well-being, really, from a space of enjoying the act of and the love behind it. So, yeah.
That's so beautiful. Yeah, and just in thinking about, you know, parents who are out there, one thing that came to my mind in addition to what's been shared is, you know, if your child tells you something about themselves or their experience that scares you, whether it's something about their mental health or something about who they are or who they love, that scares you, I would say, first of all, first of all, believe them as much as you can, and let them know that you believe them. And then just to say, there is support and there is help for you for working through that fear. And your child is not responsible for helping you with that fear, actually. And there are so many, professional mental health care supports, spiritual supports, friends potentially in your life. I would just say, look outside of your child for the support that you need for whatever it is that they're sharing with you. And I say that as a therapist, acknowledging like it can be a lot. Like I'm not a parent, but I have worked with parents and with families for a long time. And I just want to recognize the stress that it can cause for a family when a child of any age is going through something really challenging. Maybe it's a suicide attempt, maybe it's substance misuse, maybe it's coming out as trans and wanting to transition. And I hate to say all those things in the same sentence, but just to say that, these can be stressful experiences, not only for the person, but for a whole family. And to kind of go with the beautiful inner garden metaphor, just to say that, it doesn't have to be kind of this scary, intimidating thing. It doesn't have to end there. Sometimes these sort of crisis points or crisis moments for an individual or for a family can actually be sort of an invitation into something greater, into something more beautiful for your child, into something more beautiful for your family. It can be this call to an experience for growth and for greater love and cohesion in your family. It just might not look like that right now. In fact, it probably doesn't look like that right now. It probably looks like some kind of a crisis or something really scary. So again, get the support that you need because you deserve that support, and that support is available to you. You don't have to feel shame for this. If your child is struggling, it doesn't mean that it's your fault. It doesn't mean that you did something wrong as a parent. I think that's something really, really important to say. And you're not alone. There are lots of parents out there who you can find through organizations like PFLAG or many other organizations that exist, including ours, not just mine, but everybody on this panel, I think, where there are groups and there are workshops and there are spaces to be held in your experience, because it's not a small thing when you have a child who's going through something, right? It's not a small thing. And your kid needs you to be your best self and to be doing as well as you can be, so that they can feel that love and that support that undoubtedly you want to give to them, but maybe you're just not always in touch or not always able to give that love when you're experiencing the stress and the fear.
Yeah, I just want to touch on a word that I think is a phrase that RP just mentioned, and that is you're not alone. That is so important, because when these things crop up in your life, whether it's yourself going through a mental health crisis or you're a parent, a caregiver trying to be supportive of a young person, I think so often that we find ourselves wanting to isolate and then having this feeling that we're alone. And that's not the case. And there are plenty of resources and caring professionals out there that can help guide you through this process, so that you can be that loving parent or caregiver, or that friend who is there and is able to walk alongside a person who's struggling. Because that's what this is about, right? It's about community and collaboration and partnership.
Yeah. And to add on, if I were one, it's a few pieces of advice, but it's gonna go into one. So one thing that I think that happens a lot that we don't acknowledge is the adultification of children, right? So we, for some reason, I don't know why this happens, we see children as little adults, and I don't know why. We expect we expect a toddler to be able to emotionally regulate themselves and not throw tantrums. We expect a lot out of folks. So when we see young people acting in certain ways, oftentimes we'll try to come from our adult perspective to empathize, and that's not going to work. So my biggest piece of advice is to let your young folks be young folks as early as you can and as often as you can, and with as much freedom as is safe for them, right? So, what does it look like to let your children explore gender, to explore not sexuality. What does it look like for your children to explore gender as early as possible? and letting go of some, and when I say let go, that involves reflection, but letting go of some of the ideas that we have around gender, about how your child should, your male child, for example, should be at age 13. They should be doing X, Y, and Z. They should be doing, well, why? Why is that the case? You know, that's a question to ask yourself of why is that so important? And if it's not that, what harm is coming out of that? And it's interesting. I think a lot of parents that I've spoken to, a lot of concern is, well, my child is only 13, my child is only 7, my child is only however many years old. How could they possibly know who they are? The real answer to that is they don't. Right? They really don't, because yeah, they are 7, they are 13, they are whatever age they are. And they are never going to figure out who they are if they are never given the opportunity to explore. And so what happens is you have restrained your child from being able to do all of these things until they get to the point where they can leave the home, right? They're 18, they're 21, they're whatever age, they don't have to listen to anymore. They can go out and do whatever they want to do. And then we see these heightened, then we see a lot of risky behaviors, because now they are in this world where they can do all of these things and they want to experience it all. And they're not thinking about safety. They're not thinking about the things that they need guidance from you for. So by actually allowing folks to figure out who they are growing up, they're going to develop a greater sense of self and even a better connection to you as a parent. That's another thing that parents of LGBTQ youth really struggle with, is as they get older, and especially if it wasn't an affirming household growing up, there's a disconnect between that relationship. And that is because there has been so much harm over the years. How am I as a child supposed to trust you as a parent when every time I've tried to show you who I am, you just make a disgusted face at me, or you just talk mess about me behind my back, or you say things to me to my face? Why would I want to build that relationship with you? And so really reprioritizing what you think is important, and really the safety and authenticity of your child is what's most important. Yeah, I know that this is a very new age thinking for a lot of folks. A lot of parents don't want to know about the social aspects of things. They don't want to be involved in their child's sex life. They don't want to be involved in any of that. But by showing that you don't want to know, don't be mad when your child doesn't tell you. And now there's all of these issues that are coming up, right? So there's a lot that goes into that, but I would say reflection and really allowing your child, and really you as a parent, the opportunity and freedom and grace to explore and mess up, to get it right, maybe to make mistakes. All of that is a part of being human, and getting rid of that shame that we usually put onto our children.
Wow.
Yeah, thanks, Marv.
Yeah, that was amazing. Thank you all. A thought that comes to my mind is the need to give our youth role models and access to media, access to books, access to television, or anything that has people in it that reflect diversity, but especially queer people with different sexual orientations and gender identities, and also for those parents and caregivers to also consume that media and some media, so that they can see there are a lot of ways to be queer in this world. There's a lot of happiness. There are a lot of career paths. There's a lot of different lives that we can lead. And the thing that you're imagining for your child might not be what their life is, but you can help them find that really great path for them. And it helps us a lot to see ourselves reflected. And it's going to help the parents understand that my child can be queer and have an amazing life, just to see that reflected.
I love that, to be the hope for other people, right? To where they may not feel that, and for us to be able to give that to another person. How powerful is that? So thanks. So I want to spend a few minutes with each of you and just give you an opportunity for some closing remarks. One question I'd like to kind of weave into your thoughts as we start to close out is, what can we all do as a community to come together to address the crisis that so many people are experiencing? And so I'd love to hear from each of you, to share a little bit more about the work you're doing and the commitment that you all have to this work, and then encouraging our viewers tonight to come away with some tools, hopefully, where they can be supportive to their community. Syah, do you want to kick us off?
Oh, our show was like, don't start with me, but it's okay. It's all right. We're gonna make it work. Yes, I feel like there were so many questions there. Okay. I'll start with, what was that? What was the first question? Around what can we all do? Yes. What can we all do? I think, we just as a community and a society need to identify that we have a problem and sit with the fact that we have a problem. I think that's part of it, right? And I think we can get super rushed into it's called sense of urgency, right? If you look at white supremacy cultural characteristics, there's a sense of urgency, and I always call it something like fixing things with duct tape or fixing things with silly putty, whatever metaphor you want to use. It doesn't work. What happens is we see so many. We see a crisis. We see, oh, this is something that's happening. This is immediate. This is deadly. This is whatever, and we get so caught up in trying to find a solution that we actually can't actually get to the correct solution, right? We don't take the time to really talk about the nuances and talk about all of the different issues and talk about things that have worked, things that haven't worked, why those things haven't worked, why they work for some people and not others. There's so many deep conversations that need to be had. And by kind of rushing into this idea that we're supposed to magically turn into this utopian society, we're really fooling ourselves into a state of complacency because then we tire ourselves out. We get frustrated when things aren't the way. And I see this a lot with people who are just starting a social justice journey or starting to wanting to be an ally for the LGBTQ community. They're all in with fists and they're ready to fight homophobes and they're ready to do all of that, but they don't actually do their own work. And so they don't realize in some ways how you're actually causing more harm by trying to, quote, be an ally. I always say an ally is not something that you can claim. It's something that you earn, and you earn it with every individual in the community. Someone in the community sees you as an ally, and that's a different way to kind of look at it. But yeah, I think us as a community, we need to do a better job of advocating on the issues. We need to do a better job at making sure that we're being inclusive in every setting that we're in, not just when we think queer people and trans people are watching us. We need to do a better job at giving credit where it's due. Black and brown trans people of color have really, especially we're thinking about ballroom culture, that's where our slang comes from. That's where our fashions come from. That's where our categories come from. That's where our confidence comes from. And a lot of that gets stolen and misappropriated into like white drag culture. And that's just how drag queens are. And if you are a woman, you talk in a sassy voice and you do X, Y, and Z without really having an understanding of the culture that you're trying to imitate. Are very important things. So we all need to really recognize where our privileges are, where our own internal work needs to continue to be done, right? Just because I am a diversity, equity, inclusion consultant doesn't mean that I still don't do work and I still don't challenge myself. So that is super important. I will close with kind of what I'm doing in child, it's a lot. So as I said, I have my own diversity, equity, and inclusion consulting business, Syah B Consulting, because I be consulting people. So deepdivedei.com, check me out. Your first consultation is free. I work with all types of industries. And if I haven't worked with your industry before, you could be the first. So come on, don't play with me. Other things that are going on, I'm working on trying to get some more public-facing events. One that is coming up on June 2nd is a collaboration with myself and an organization called Kite and Dart, who does business consulting. And so they were my business coaches, y'all. So they got me right on together. But we're doing our first DEI kind of section for their business. We're calling it, well, Deep Dive DEI, because of course. And we're going to be kind of just, it's a free event, so feel free to join in. But we'll be unpacking fears, concerns, hopes that you may have around starting your diversity, equity, inclusion journey. It's specifically targeted towards entrepreneurs, so especially, or business owners, small business owners. So if you are, you have your own organization and you're wondering, well, I don't want to get canceled. You know, I'm not trying to have people come at me in the comments section of Facebook and all of that. Come in, we're going to unpack some of those myths, some of those concerns people may have, and give you some, yes, RPE period. We're going to unpack some of those myths and hopefully get you to join in for some empathy coaching afterwards. So yes, that's what I got going.
Great, Syah, thanks so much. RP.
Okay, hi. This is such a big question. I'm like, what do I even want to add? I feel like everything Syah just said was so important. Thank you. And you know, there's so much that I'm thinking about that we can all do. And I just want to say that I appreciate what was named about the action bias, that we always have to do something. And what that made me think of immediately, that everybody can do, or everybody who's interested in can do, is it made me think about just the practices that I have sought in my own life to ground me, and to get me in touch with my heart. This might be kind of woo for some people, but for me, again, it's kind of like this top-down approach is one way to tackle these issues, and it can be a very important way to tackle these issues. And personally, as a contemplative psychotherapist and whatever, all the things that I am, I think that, you know, it starts with us, and it starts with our own healing, and it starts with our own kind of deep, speaking of deep dive, like our own just like deep listening to, you know, what is real for us? What are we really feeling when we see people who maybe are different, or who are struggling, or who we don't understand, or who we're afraid of? Or again, you know, with these situations where it can feel so big and it can feel so overwhelming, how can we ever, you know, make a change? I think just seeking out those practices that help all of us to just come back to ourselves and come back to that kind of innate feeling that we all have access to, that we don't have to like look for or find on the internet, or like find anywhere else other than right here, which is really, to me, that's my moral compass. That's my way of, you know, getting in touch with how I want to relate to other people in my life, from that place of compassion that is not like compassion as a buzzword and how do I get to it, but actually just something that every single one of us has access to and has a chance to uncover within ourselves. So that's one thing that I want to say is, you know, one way that we can address the everything that's going on that we've been talking about tonight, is to go to those practices and seek out that healing and that support, so that we can all, as you know, as a community, be our best selves and relate with one another in a good way. So I think that's what I want to say in response to that question. And then just to share a little bit more in closing about Queer Asterisk and kind of what we're up to, if anybody's interested. Our newest venture and big project is that we're starting an intensive outpatient program for queer and trans youth. And so anybody who, you know, if you know a young person, or if you work with young people or anything like that, and they're needing more comprehensive mental health support, something that's going to be more frequent and a little more in depth than a once a week session. That's something that we're going to be offering starting hopefully in September. It's basically less than like a residential treatment center, but more than once a week counseling. So it would be like 3 or 4 days a week of some programming, especially for queer and trans youth, within an environment where all the staff have lived experience within the community. So if that's something that you're interested in, either getting involved with, like working with us, or if you have youth who would benefit from that kind of an experience for 8 weeks, we accept all insurance, including Medicaid. You can reach out to me directly. My email is rp@asterisk.com, or go to our website. And yeah, again, just thank you so much for the opportunity to be here on this amazing panel. It's been such a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks so much, RP. Quána.
Awesome. Thank you. Everything that Syah and RP had already said really resonates. So I was thinking like, okay, well, what else do I want to add that hasn't already been said? I feel like in order to address coming together to address the issue of mental health and how do we promote this more, things that came up for me that I reflect on is be an inner peace gardener. Be someone who values mental health in your own life, hold space for others in your own circles, let it be it's in your family, in your friend circles, your other communities and tribes, or the spaces in which you work and engage to talk about mental health, to hold space, to check in with people. You know, that really can be underestimated sometimes and really can make such a difference. And, you know, be a lifelong learner about the different things that you can be doing just to practice, again, mental health as a garden that you're seeking to grow because it's valuable. And if we value mental health and doing different practices to support that just in general, I think that can really increase our ability to be compassionate towards ourselves and others. It can help us be able to open more space to listen to stories of others, to understand people who may not be the same as us. I know that for myself as a teaching artist, I really value using the arts and mindfulness and guided meditation as ongoing positive tools to help nourish my inner peace and wellness. And you know, I also am a person who has sought out other types of interventions throughout my life, and they have been amazing and so helpful, but just for that daily practice. And so as a teaching artist, I facilitate creative meditation workshops to help people use expressive art making and mindfulness to just help promote relaxation, self-compassion, and emotional well-being. And so in addition to the other tools you may seek, if you're ever interested and wanting to know more about different types of creative meditation workshops, of using the arts as one of the tools to help you check in with yourself, to help promote a strengths-based, nourishing self-worth within you, please feel free to reach out. I'll put my contact information in the chat. I believe that there's a lot of different kinds of tools that you can have in your toolbox to use throughout your life to promote mental and emotional well-being for yourself. And I really encourage people to think about how can you come together with the communities that you're in to do it in creative ways. And not only just traditional ways that we may talk about primarily.
Great, thanks, Quána. Marv.
Yeah, thank you all so much for that. I've lost what I was going to say like 12 times through this because I'm just listening and absorbing it, and it's amazing. I had to write it down because I kept forgetting it. But what I'm really coming to is that our liberation is bound together, and that, you know, I mean, and I'll even speak for the LGBTQ movement that's, you know, that's been happening for years. Like we have left too many of our fellow LGBTQ people behind, and we're not, you know, some of us, we are not taking that anymore, and we're bringing everybody along. We have a human experience. I think we should value. I love Syah's take on celebrate these things that are happening in your life. Celebrate your beauty and your difference and the things that bring you joy, and know that like we do have all these amazing differences, but we also have this human experience. And so if you're struggling to empathize and show compassion for someone, really relate to them on that human level. If you're struggling to get behind trans rights, just know we're bringing you with us. Trans rights means gender freedom for everyone. We are bringing you with us. We will get there together. So our liberation is bound together. we have to look out for one another. We have to be supportive. And just, I mean, it sounds so cheesy, but to create that world that we're all talking about, that we all want to be a part of, that we want our children to grow up in, we want our neighbors' children to be able to grow up in. So just try not to forget that.
This has been such a wonderful conversation. Each of our panelists has brought so much to our discussion tonight. And so I'm just really grateful to each of you, and also appreciate the audience for being with us tonight. Just sharing a few last perspectives from my end. So with Envision You, I'm incredibly grateful to work with an amazing team of folks who show up with their own individual lived experiences and are passionate about improving outcomes for this community. And it really is such a pleasure to work with people who are change makers, who are willing to challenge the biases that are in place and the systems that prevent people from living their best life. And just on a personal note, one of the things that happened to me in my own mental health journey, I talked about eventually finding an affirming care provider who validated who I was as a queer man. And one of the things this therapist challenged me on is, tomorrow when you wake up and you're not feeling those powerful thoughts of self-harm or depression or anxiety, if you are able to, live a day without using substances, what would that look like for you? And that was so powerful because so often we talk about the consequences of our behavior in this case, it was about opportunity, and it was so powerful. And I just want to say today, I get to work with these beautiful, amazing people on this panel today, have a great team of people at Envision You, have a great dog, wonderful friends. I get to do work that I'm passionate about. And so I'm a little emotional, but just filled with so much gratitude that I get to do this. And so just know that, when we all come together and work together, we can thrive, and it's a beautiful thing. And so, I'm just incredibly grateful again to our panelists, to Tattered Cover, for bringing us together, for their commitment to community conversations, inclusivity, and creating safe spaces for LGBTQ plus folks. So thank you again for joining us tonight. It's been a real pleasure moderating this panel, and I wish each of you
Oh, Steven, I think you're muted.
So yeah, I'm sorry, hit the wrong button. But yeah, thanks everyone. Hope you have a wonderful evening and a fantastic long holiday weekend. I know I'm looking forward to it. So thanks everyone.
Thank you.